Before I begin to actually debunk the alternative hypothesis, I think it's important that I describe how the anti-race realists, and unfortunately my past self, have often helped to proliferate racist thinking and ideology. First, we need to define racism. Principally, there are two different types of racism. A, overt, and B, soft. Overt racism is typified by prejudice, intolerance, fear, disgust, and derogatory or violent actions or comments made toward a group or groups of people based upon perceived racial identity. Examples are scientific racism, institutional racism, supremacism, etc. Soft racism, meanwhile, is typified by ambivalent, evasive, dismissive, or condescending attitudes, behaviors, and language towards groups of people based upon perceived racial identity. Examples are reverse racism, social constructivism, colorblind racism, etc. Condemning social constructivism as softly racist may seem unfair, because social constructivism is often the position taken by those who want to challenge racism. But this is exactly my point, that social constructivism is a self-defeating position which, in part, validates race realism and racism. This argument is complicated by the fact that social constructivism is not a singular position, but an umbrella term that rests over a variety of many different strains of thought. So I'm specifically going to be talking about social constructivism as defined by Eduardo Bonilla Silva and other critical race theorists. If you're a social constructivist and you feel unacknowledged or misrepresented, I beg you to watch the whole video. It's possible that in neglecting nuance I'm going to sound harsh or unforgiving, but it's for a valid and meaningful reason that I'm doing so. The reason that social constructivism is compatible with racism is because it implies that 1. Race is real and tangible in Homo sapiens sapiens, whether our appreciation of differences be socially constructed or not, and 2. That differences between groups are derived from these real race differences, skin color, variation in IQ, etc., whether or not we can ignore them. You may have heard people talk about the fact that race is a social construct. In fact, I've said such things before, unaware of how I was reinforcing the position of race realists. Common examples of social constructivist language are, insert minority here is human too, or the differences between races don't matter or are insignificant. These comments are problematic because they lend credence to the notion that differences between groups of people arise from truly racial characteristics. Eduardo Bonilla Silva, in his book Racism Without Racists, Colorblind Racism and the Persistence of Racial Inequality in America, discusses how this sort of conceptualization of race otherizes softly. Social constructivism is the belief that the differences that do exist between groups are truly racial, though the significance of these differences is socially fabricated and reinforced. An example would be Sam Harris, who believes that differences between races exist and that there is a non-zero probability that these differences are genetic, but that we should not judge people based upon their race or derive policy based upon these differences, as group averages are seldom representative of individual character or capacity, and this latter clarification is absolutely true. However, it is undeniable according to this logic that there are qualitative differences between races at the aggregate level, which influence capacity, potential, behavior, and overall life outcomes at the macro scale. Harris, whether or not he is willing to admit it, is an apologist for race realists, and so are most social constructivists, as I'll get to in a moment. This is why I look at the conflict between Sam Harris and other social constructivists as fundamentally bizarre and mundane. They're fighting each other over principally the same position, just spelled differently. According to social constructivists, and I myself was not long ago one of them, race is predicated upon our consciously and unconsciously constructed meanings and contexts associated with a group's physical and immutable characteristics. For instance, a social constructivist would claim that a white woman could not, no matter how many cultural mannerisms she adopted, become a black woman. They would further argue that this is predicated upon the fact that she simply does not contain black DNA, and therefore doesn't have black skin, hair, facial features, etc. In this instance, black is a genetic condition, which gives rise to socially fabricated contextualization of that blackness. So if race isn't a social construction, and if this position is in itself softly racist, then what is race? And what is a position that isn't racist? Meet me at part 3 and find out.